sessions in we are doing 2 sessions in one, sessions 8 and 9, which is on phase 1, the consensus building. So we are officially starting with the second booklet of the ALESBA. And the reason we are doing 2 sessions in one is because we are running out of time to finish on the 15th of December. So you will remember, Anthony, your microphone, please.
Sorry.
It's okay, just for the background. So you will remember in total, this round 1 has 14 sessions. So you can imagine if today we are doing session 8 and 9, we are only remaining with 5 sessions, and 2 of those will also be a hybrid. So in total, I hope this is good news or even a little bit of sad news. So because Thursdays we will not see each other again anymore until next year. So we are going to have in total, apart from today, only 4 more sessions until the 15th of December. So I think that will hopefully give you hope that you can make it and you will be finished with round 1 by then. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the program for today and what is up. Can everybody see my screen, I hope? So let's just look at the program for today. I'm going to do just a 1 slide of recap for session 7. And as I said last week, we finished the first booklet. And then today we do this hybrid of sessions 8 and 9. And I want to remind you once again, please bring from now onwards your ALESBA booklets when you sit into the online sessions, because often we will refer to diagrams or specific content in the booklets. And it's just easier if you keep it with you, especially for small group work. So I'm going to, since this is the first session on phase 1, I'm going to do a presentation to give you an overview on phase 1 consensus building. And this is quite an exciting booklet because it talks about topics I think all of us carry close to our hearts. And I'm also going to make a presentation on the preparatory activities. How do you start consensus building in your country? And I'll give time for questions and answers. And I hope we will have enough people from different countries to have a quick group exercise. I think you will remember last week I said, I'm trying to save time for all of you. I know you are so busy, especially this time of year. So I'm trying to do less assignments and more group exercises during the session so that you still get the practical feel, but you don't have to spend so much time outside the ALESBA sessions on Thursdays. There will be one bigger assignment for this booklet, but apart from that, I'm trying to keep everything within the session, just to give you a little bit of a break and a breather. So we'll do a group exercise on stakeholders and how do you prepare to start a consensus building process. I think we'll need a body break after that. And then you will present and discuss we will discuss the group exercise in plenary before we close, just with a few points on the webinar and any other last catch-up sessions. So that's the program for today. And thank you for joining everybody that's here. If there are no questions or comments, I want to just jump into the presentation. Is that okay? Let me get started then, since I see no hands up or I hear no voices. So just a quick reminder, last week, the last session of booklet 1, we looked at the phases in the ALESBA approach. Which phases exist in the adult learning education system building approach? We said there are 5. Phase 1 is about consensus building. Phase 2 is how do you assess your current system at whichever stage it is, and how do you diagnose the system blockages and challenges that exist in your system at the moment. So phase 1 consensus building is about getting all stakeholders on board towards a system building process, a conscious system building process. And those stakeholders will then engage in phase 2 to assess the system and to diagnose the blockages, so that they can consider in phase 3 different alternative options to address these blockages and challenges and design a new improved system. That new and improved system has to be implemented and tested, maybe at a kind of pilot scale in a few districts, and that's what we refer to in phase 4. And once you've tested that new system for maybe 2 to 3 years, you can review it. You can make adjustments for where you think things have to be adjusted, what is not working well, before you can upscale to a bigger area or a bigger target group. So those are the 5 phases, and that's what we discussed in last week's session. And we also had a group exercise around in what phase do we think we are in each of the countries, and we had quite a good discussion around that. So if you have any more questions, also please just refer to the first booklet, and you can read through those last phases, but also any other parts of the booklets you think you missed. And if you are really concerned, also feel free to contact me for any catch-up or office hours. I'm happy to explain. So, introduction to phase 1, consensus building. So I'm going to try not to go too fast, and Lindia, please check me if I do, or anybody else, if you feel I'm running and you can't keep up, then please just stop me. I'm going to start to just give a little bit of background what we mean when we talk about consensus building in the ALESBA. First of all, we say adult learning and education system encompasses all of those who participate in service delivery. This is adult learning and education services, whether it's literacy, whether it's non-formal skills training. So the ALES system takes into consideration all those stakeholders involved in service delivery, involved in even regulating our sector, financing, and also the users, the target groups of the services. So all those stakeholders make part of the system. And the system, with consensus among those stakeholders, should consider the need for cooperation. We should keep in mind that ALE has different sectors and it has an integrated nature. We often implement integrated programs, and also that immediately imply that we look at cross-sectoral approaches. So when we talk about the system and we talk about the stakeholders that's involved in the system, keep in mind these things. Strengthening the system. As soon as we start the process of strengthening or system building, it often means we are reforming the relationships among these stakeholders. And why is that needed? It's needed so that there can be clear and consistent mandates, functions that we can measure and monitor and support. So it needs mechanisms for communication and a feedback cycle. So you will remember in the first booklet, we talked about the ALESBA conceptual framework, the system building blocks, the system elements. Keep all of that in mind. Phase 1, we are looking at consensus among stakeholders so that they can build the system with those system building blocks. So don't think we are moving out of it. This is a very important phase to make sure we can finally reach to that process of building the system with all the system building blocks. So it starts with recognizing the many stakeholders and the roles they have in the system. And you can see in our little cartoon, we have anybody from NGOs to donors to academics to NGOs, local, international, etc. As I mentioned in the beginning, so many stakeholders are involved. When we look at the stakeholders and we look at the different systems of the country, there is different forms of relationships within the system. And while I read through, I would like you guys to sort of think, what type of relationship do we have in our country? So I'll try to explain as I go, but please reflect upon it, and you are also welcome to put up your hand if you want to share something about it. Oh, Malimu, welcome. Just, yeah, your microphone, thank you, but welcome for joining. We are happy to hear and see you. So, forms of relationships within the system. Some countries have a very high centralized system where power and control over resources lie at the center of the government. So the government would determine how the system works and how other stakeholders would operate within the system. Other countries may have a fully decentralized system where local authorities have more autonomy about services and making decisions about ALE services. There's also deconcentrated systems which spread the autonomy across levels of governance with different mandates at different levels. For example, federal systems. So there will be certain responsibilities at national level, certain responsibilities and mandates and power to, of course, at federal level, at regional level, and again at local government level. There's also horizontal relationships and structures where different partners in Ali belong to different systems. For example, the TBET sector may have a system on their own. People who deal with literacy may have a system on their own. So keep that horizontal relationships in mind as well, even within the above mentioned ones. And then you even get countries where certain functions are carried out by autonomous and semi-autonomous bodies and still financed through the state, and or with public-private partnerships. For example, in Germany, DVB International's Adult Education Association for Germany, not the international arm, the German arm, they deliver services and they are autonomous, but they are funded by government. So these also exist. And I'm sure in Africa, we may have quite a number of public-private partnerships as well. And it would be nice to hear from you if that exists. There are also countries where the whole system is independent and rely on the private sector, NGOs, charitable bodies to deliver services, and they can be funded by government or a blend. And the role of the state in this case will be only or largely regulatory. So they will leave the delivery up to these stakeholders. So these are just to give you an overview. And I hope while I was reading through, you sort of try to pin yourselves where you are as a country. Are there any comments, or shall I continue and then we'll discuss at the end? Okay, I move. So consensus building, it's not a once-off phase or step. So even though we say phase 1 consensus building in the ALESBA, it's just to get the ball rolling. Consensus building is a crucial intervention that's conducted for the full duration of ALES system building. That means in each phase. And you will see as we go through, unless there is consensus, none of the activities in the other phases would take off or could be implemented properly. So just keep that in mind. It has to be pulled through all the phases of the system building. So what do we mean by consensus building? And there's so many definitions, but in essence or in practical terms, we would refer to overwhelming agreement. You would not, or it would be seldom that you would get every single stakeholder to agree and have full consensus on adult learning and education system building. But at least you need a level of overwhelming agreement or sufficient consensus among enough stakeholders to continue with the process. We can also see it as a product of efforts made in good faith to meet the interest of stakeholders. And what do they need this agreement or consensus about? We usually need them to agree that the existing system needs improvement. If they think it doesn't need improvement, there is no use to start the process of system building. But at least they should agree there are gaps, the system needs improvement, and the ALESBA could be useful in this case. They may have to agree that the current roles and responsibilities among stakeholders need to be unpacked. Maybe you need to look at new relationship structures and accountabilities. And that the current system should be assessed, diagnosed. We should look for alternative options to redesign, to implement, to test, and to upscale. So at least basic agreement about a process of consensus, of system building with the necessary consensus for that. And just a quick word when I'm talking about current relationships and responsibilities that need to be unpacked. Often you find that when a system doesn't work well, some stakeholders will take on the roles and responsibilities of others as a kind of a coping mechanism to still deliver services, to still keep things going. And if you then say, now we are building a system, sometimes stakeholders have to give up those roles and give it to the stakeholder that actually has the mandate. So that in itself can create some tension. So you can see why consensus building is so important throughout. I go to the next. So let's look at a few principles and ground rules for consensus building. It's important that we have participation of all stakeholders, but that they also take ownership of the process, communication, transparent communication, regular communication, that we constantly search for compatibility and mutual agreement, that we manage conflict because it will come up. It's, as you know, part of life, that we look for credibility and transparency throughout the process, that we make action learning part of it, that all stakeholders learn from the process. So even when we make mistakes, even if we have tension in our relationships, what do we learn from that? How do we take it forward? And this means, as I always say, when we come to systems thinking, we will need a paradigm shift in the whole process. For interest of time, I'm continuing. So we have a roadmap here for consensus building throughout the 5 phases. If you look at in your screen, I think will also be the left-hand corner. So phase 1 of consensus building, there are sub-activities in phase 1, and I will elaborate those soon. But you cannot just go from this session and say, we are starting consensus building. How do you start? You need some preparatory activities. And you usually need a driver for this process. And last week's discussion, people asked also, we had a catch-up meeting with Tanzania, and they asked a very good question. How do we start? Who starts? Who can start? And so we will unpack that today. Which stakeholder can start? Can any stakeholder start the process of consensus building for system building? So we need some preparatory work, and therefore you need a driver. You need somebody that say, guys, let's get together. Let's start system building. And then you need, once you did this preparatory meetings, get-togethers, you need an official kind of startup phase where you will look at startup activities such as, once again, looking at the scope and context of your ALES system, agreeing on the major challenges, even starting a visioning exercise. Okay, we want to build a system. What is the vision for the system? You'll have to do a stakeholder analysis to explore roles and responsibilities. You'll have to officially introduce the ALESBA and make a plan for this long system building journey. But as you can see, before that, we need to at least have a few preparatory activities. So in phase 1, we have this preparatory as well as the startup activities. And then how do we carry it through? Let's say we now have sufficient consensus, we are starting system building. So through phases 2 to 5, we have to focus on consensus building and look at things like partnerships. Partnerships is a big driver to make sure system building can happen. We have to look at teamwork. We'll have to look at conflict resolution, influencing, negotiation, risk management. All these processes will have to take forward in the remaining phases. So that's just your journey for system building. And for today, I want to start on this preparation phase, the guy in the left corner where you see the driver. So what do we mean when we look at preparation for phase 1? We refer to finding a champion or a driver or more than one that can start the process. So this could be an NGO, this could be government. And last week's session, Uganda reminded us that in reality, government remains the overall duty bearer for adult education services. So they should play a role. But if they are not the ones who start, any NGO, university could start the process and bring stakeholders on board to discuss the topic and to see, do you have sufficient consensus to start system building? So find a champion or a driver for the process. Identify a crisis, a catalyst, or an entry point, and you may wonder why that sentence is there. I remember when I did my master's degree, you know, all of you will remember how much research and reading you have to do during these degrees. I read some interesting articles that said many countries that went through a revolution, for example, shortly after the revolution would start adult literacy programs. So it was like the revolution was sort of a catalyst to look into adult education again. So what could be the catalyst for today? Could it be youth unemployment? Could it be the fact that we need to make sure our youth and adults have sufficient skills for a livelihood? What is the catalyst or even a crisis if there's been a lot of protests in the country about youth or adults? Could that be a crisis we could use to say, this is the point where we seriously have to look at our system and the kind of services we deliver? Or which other entry points exist? Did government, for example, launch a new policy? Is there nice entry points for us in that policy to say, it's not just about the policy, it's about implementing the policy. So how are we going to build the system? The Uganda colleagues can bear me out later, but in Uganda's case, a strong driver was the launching of the adult literacy policy as well as a community development policy. And that sparked the interest to say, we need, and I will use Uganda's language, they said, we need a robust system to implement this policy. And that set off a number of activities on the system building journey. So what can be the crisis, the catalyst, or the entry point in your countries? Who could be the driver? And how could you start your preparatory activities? Could it be that from your own organization, you can start to have a series of small bilateral or group meetings just to test the water, to discuss with each other? There is this approach. Could this approach assist us to build the system in this country? How can we get started? What do you think other stakeholders want? So this is really quite, it can be informal, but it could also be mini workshops where you invite a number of stakeholders to start to discuss the topic before you have a kind of, I don't want to say official, but a more concrete startup process of consensus building. So this is what we mean by preparatory. So if you were to have to go back today and you say, next week we start consensus building, how would you go about? Who would you call? Definitely not Ghostbusters, as the movie says, but who would you call to get started on your system building journey? So with this small presentation, let me rather stop sharing now and just get back to you guys for some questions and answers. This is a very brief introduction, guys, to phase 1 consensus building. And I would like to hear comments, questions, answers before I ask you to do a quick group exercise for today, just to get a sense of how you absorb consensus building and specifically preparatory work. So can I open for questions or comments? Also, if there's questions for clarity.
Incidentally, I'm in an environment where there's rain.
Yeah.
Just in case there is some background noise, that's just the rain.
Okay, we will know it's rain and thunder. Thank you.
I just like the analogy when you talked about the driver.
Yeah.
And I was looking back here in Uganda, and I'm imagining, okay, the government is the driver.
Mm-hmm.
But there's sometimes when you have a driver who needs to be awakened.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a good driver, but he's drunk.
That's a very good analogy, Tweni. I'll take that forward. Or he's very sleepy and needs to be awakened. That's true.
Exactly. So, and I think it brings it out very well. Yes, we know the government is the driver, but then sometimes they seem as if they are taking a back seat and they need to be tickled, they need to be convinced, they need to be a lot of kind of awakening. So then the second analogy you gave was about the driver, and then you also talked about the question of maybe I'm missing it, but that one of the driver, I think it is quite a good one. And in many cases, at least I speak to Uganda, because in Uganda, yes, the government is and should. They have the resources, they have the zeal, but then sometimes they seem as if they don't mind or they don't know. And there is so much convincing to be done to really bring them on board for them to take up their responsibility.
True. True. Or sometimes the driver might drive a direction where the passengers do not want to go, you know, and then it also needs maybe to stop and replan the trip a little bit, the route of system building. Thank you, Tweni. Very interesting analogy. I'll steal that one from you and I'll give credit. Any other questions or comments or taking the analogy further? So I think it is clear.
Just again, the other one which I had forgotten was
yes,
the problem. Yeah, the problem.
Yeah.
I don't know whether many times systems recognize that there's a problem that must be attended to. I know in development there is that saying that invention begins from problems. But then what about a situation where you see clearly there's a problem and there is no willingness to address the problem? The problem is there, which should tickle the stakeholders to thinking, but then people are sleeping with the problem. I think, I don't know how we can address that, where the problem is clear. You talked about adult education systems following certain revolutions, but then sometimes you see the problems are there. Situations that we are struggling with, for example, in poverty, situations like poverty, like disease, climate change, but everybody is sleeping. The problem is not addressing is not creating the need for stakeholders to adapt the system to address that challenge. I think such kind of situations are at times there.
Definitely, and
where the problem is not articulating the desire to address the challenge.
Exactly. And that's why I said part of consensus building is one of the factors must be agreement that there are challenges, that the system needs improvement. If everybody is very complacent and think the system is fine, it will not inspire them. Imelda, your microphone. Imelda? Thank you. So it's correct, you are, Tweni, that there must be agreement. Sampeo, I see your hand as well. You can continue, Sampeo.
Yeah, so Sonia, you see in the question of relationships that you have just discussed, you see it is quite easy sometimes to point out to what the government is doing. And while the central challenge remains to do stakeholders understands that they have, you know, they are part of the process, you know, in ALE.
Exactly.
And yes, what do we say? We are now building consensus with whom? Because everybody is trying to point to the government. While what we are talking right now is that for us to be able to come to consensus, we first need to understand our own position, our own responsibility, that we are coming on board to say, now we want to reach into this consensus. Now, what we have as the challenge in our countries is that there are stakeholders who are key players in ALE, but they don't even recognize that what they are doing is in ALE. So quite easy to, you know, to point out to the government. But I think the reason why we are here is that all of us, I've seen Mwamchaka is there coming from network of CSOs in the country. I think this is very incredible because they have a message to take to the stakeholders and colleagues. What we are doing actually is this. And there are questions of recognition, questions of this and this and this. Now let's come on board and see whether we'll be able to come to consensus. Yeah.
And thank you for that, Cynthia. What I've learned is that sometimes, and I'm going to try to talk to both sides of the story, not that it's really sides, but to give you an idea. Often, if the government was somehow, let's say, sleepy, let me use Tweeny's words, you may find that NGOs start to take over the role of service delivery. And then when government is activated and they want to become more regulatory, NGOs do not want to give up that role. And that's why the stakeholders analysis is so important, to analyze what are the mandates, what are the functions of each stakeholder, but also potentially what is the best we can bring to the table as a stakeholder? Where is our expertise area? And so in a bigger system, you need, I always say development is too big a job for one stakeholder. So how can each stakeholder play their role in this big puzzle of a system and still make it work, still make sure that at the end of the day, services are delivered on the ground. And that's what we want to achieve with the consensus building, having that clear understanding where every stakeholder feels valued, feels they can contribute. I will share an example. Some years ago in Ethiopia, I implemented the Women Empowerment Program, and it was multi-sectoral. It included women affairs officers from government, agriculture, education, local NGOs, SMMEs. We had quite a number of stakeholders. And I remember in one district I attended, and it was a very vibrant group of young people who worked in that district from all these stakeholders and sectors, both. And they implemented they presented to us the progress of that district. And to this day, it inspired me. You know, when they presented, I constantly had to lean over the shoulder of my colleague and ask, is he from agriculture? Is he or she from education? I could not differentiate from their presentations and the way they were informed and the way they talked about the progress on the ground with all the women groups. I could not differentiate from which sector, or do they come from NGO, or do they come from government, because they presented as a team. And this to me until today is the ideal form of consensus, where the focus is on the target group, where the focus is on the service, where you cooperate so well that you know enough about each other's work that you could even answer questions for that sector or that stakeholder. But in the end, your contributions added up to a service on the ground. And that takes time. It doesn't mean there was no conflict, but that's where we want to reach, where people almost focus so much on the service delivery that it's not more anymore so institutional, so organizational. You become part of a bigger whole. I hope that makes sense as a good example, also as consensus building. Are there more questions, comments, experiences? Okay, then I have two options for this team. We are today a very small group participants, and I think there is so many tasks people have. I know this time of year, lesson learned for us in the Moja, I think, Lindia, never have courses in November and December, because it is clear, guys, and we really appreciate so much that you are here and you are trying to make the effort. So original idea was to break into country teams and to have a nice discussion about consensus building in countries. But I think the groups are too small. For example, I can see in South Africa, it's just Tandy and Mara said she can only listen today, she cannot talk. For Uganda, we have 20 because Imelda is struggling in and out. But we have quite a strong Tanzania contingent. So I'm leaning towards rather asking the questions I wanted to ask for group work just in plenary, and we continue this discussion a little bit. Would that be okay with you guys? So that at least we get a feel, and then we can close the session from there, because I think you will be in some cases only one participant in your small group. So that would definitely not work. Oh, I see a lot of thumbs up. Okay. Great. Thank you, guys. Therefore, let us entertain these questions. Okay, there is a, what shall I say, a rule. Please contribute. Please participate. Otherwise, I have to cut now even this plenary session. That will be terrible. So I'm just going, I don't want to do a screen share. I just want to ask this even as a part of a discussion. Let me ask this first question, and maybe I hope this is not too provocative, but I think you guys already started to talk to it. Who are the existing stakeholders, do you think, in your system? And you've answered this to some extent already in previous assignments, but the bigger question linked to this is, what would you say is the current level of consensus among different stakeholders in ALES system building in your country? Is there enough consensus about the challenges that exist, maybe the need for some improvement? Is there enough interest/consensus to cooperate into a bigger system building process? How would you feel? How would you describe the situation in your country? Let's just get some input and feedback on that and have a discussion on that, and then we'll do one more question. Anybody? And this is no critique against the country. It's to understand processes of consensus building better. And even when you answer, you're welcome to elaborate and say, how did you reach that level of consensus? Lindia, our hands disappeared. The hands that said, let's do plenary, is gone. Guys, can anybody give us some feedback?
Sorry, can I speak, Sonia?
Yes, please.
I must say also as a disclaimer that I am fairly new to the system, to the space of adult and community education. So my responses will be based on what I've read, studied, my studies, and a little bit of the 2 years that I've spent in this space. But what I've realized is that there's been a lot of progress in terms of improving the systems and including stakeholders. And as I might have said in my previous assignment, that there is a white paper in post-schooling and community education, so which also speaks to the National Development Plan of South Africa. However, most of the focus that should be on community education is mainly on the more formal, which is the community colleges or the community learning centers that they are. And yet, I think it is the implementation process in terms of including all the other stakeholders is yet to be realized, because we all know that there's a lot of formal education, non-formal, in fact, or informal education that happens in the communities, which is not yet realized. And when I'm saying realized, or I'm talking about being supported, and like we are saying that it's not necessarily a critique, but it's a challenge that one needs to say, how do we engage all these aspects? Because the fact that it was called community education was for it to be owned and involve all the other stakeholders, but there's still no synergy in those systems. For instance, the people in one example is when the community education or the adult education who used to be under the Department of Basic Education, and they were using schools as to deliver programs. But when it was taken over by Department of Higher Education, it meant that they are no more under the same department, while the schools should be, because they are public facility, government facility, they're supposed to be used by all stakeholders who need to improve and education in the community. Community education lecturers or educators still struggle with finding times, and sometimes these classes are locked and there's no, and people are asked to use their own homes and other facilities. So I think the whole idea is too grand, is too idealistic, and yet when it comes to rolling out and involving all the stakeholders, whom I feel that if there is consensus there, they would see a situation, because we can, the planning or the vision would be realized if there is much more focus on building consensus.
So true, so true. Thanks, Stanley. I'm sure Mara would have loved to be able to talk to that as well. Malimu, you want to contribute?
Yes, I wanted to say something on that also. Sometimes when it comes to finding consensus, it's a bit cumbersome, sometimes I'm saying. But the way I have been following up what is happening within the country, within Tanzania actually, where we have Adult Education Institute spearheading the process, because the government is the one supposed to champion adult leading the country. And through the Institute of Adult Education, I can say this is the driver who is at the driver's seat and trying to show the direction. And because of that, we have seen a number of interventions that is coming in. The government is allowing a number of stakeholders, non-government organizations to come up with a number of initiatives that can be used within the education system that promote adult learning. That is now moving from the former kind of intervention that we had, that adult learning used to be something that has to be delivered to adult people, those who failed to follow the formal system of education. And currently now we are experiencing a kind of a paradigm shift that actually, when we are talking of adult learning, we are not really focusing on the adult people, but we are saying we are trying to look into whoever failed to catch up the formal system has to be engaged in that system. Then how are we going to do this? That's why now we have seen a number of initiatives that is coming in through various stakeholders who are coming in. At the same time, the government trying to ensure that it emphasizes on the quality of whatever is going to be delivered in terms of curriculum, in terms of, because I have seen a number of organizations who are coming up with a kind of curriculum that is going to offer a kind of alternative learning that is equivalent to what is actually ALE is trying to propagate. And then the government as key in that process has to ensure that whoever is coming with an initiative, that has to be linked with the existing system, so that we have a curriculum that is comprehensive, in sense that whoever will be would like to chip in has to make sure that whatever is going to come into the system, adult education system, is something that is agreed by all stakeholders, so that we really need to have someone with a certain curriculum that is not integrated within the system. Therefore, I can see how the government is trying to bring consensus to all stakeholders, the non-state actors, to development partners, because what has been the shortfall in adult learning for quite some times is the aspect of funding. Therefore, when we are trying to bring all people, all stakeholders within the same basket, it means that at least we are trying to form a consensus that will bring each and everyone, and all of us having a same thinking when we are trying to promote adult learning in the country. That's my contribution for now.
Thank you so much, both to Mwalimu and Thandi. Before I give somebody else, I just want to make a few points because I'm scared I'm going to forget it. Mwalimu, you reminded me also, I'm seeing your hands, Mpeo, I'll get to you right now. You reminded me that, remember when I said earlier, we are not throwing the system building blocks out. The consensus is to build a system that makes sure all those building blocks are in place. And as you were talking, I was thinking when you talked, for example, about the curriculum, and I know Twini and Imelda and others from Uganda can share this experience as well. In Uganda, for example, they started to have a national adult education approach. The approach or methodology, that system building block under the technical processes, is an approach that is promoted by government to deliver learning, to deliver services. And new stakeholders that come on board are, as you also said in Tanzania, are so welcome to contact the government to get training in that approach to use it. And even if they don't use that approach, their efforts must still come into the process. So the curriculum has to be acknowledged. The institutional structures have to be inclusive. So you guys, I hope you can see, and Mwalimu, you gave me good examples, thank you. You can see how consensus flows through each and every building block, how we agree on all of those aspects by all stakeholders so that each can play their role. And then I want to jump to Thandi. Thandi, you made such an important point. We haven't had time in this course to talk much about the place, things such as community learning centers, such as community colleges. And I know Mara always carry this flag high. And so I love this topic also because I wrote manuals about it and we piloted it in Uganda and Ethiopia in my tenure. But sometimes I think unless, and it seems like a basic thing, but unless adult education has a place the way basic education has schools, higher education has universities and colleges, it seems that unless adult education has a place where the service can be delivered, we're always sort of on the margins. So we should at some point, I just want to pick up what you are saying, Thandi, and that complexity of getting stakeholders on board to agree even on the place where the service has to be delivered. So that's a topic we should take up at some point, either in a webinar or in the course again. So I just wanted to grab the points from those two speakers. Thank you so much. Simpeo, sorry for keeping you waiting. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Sonia. So thank you, and thank you, Madam Chacha, for your nice description. But what I wanted to say is that when it comes to Tanzania, you see, remember, Sonia, I have been talking this several times to say in Tanzania, that term ALE is being used as ANFE.
Of course.
And it has been our culture. And so that should be, noted, is what Mom Chacha was saying. When he was saying nowadays education is no longer accommodating adults. Is accommodating even people who have failed in the formal education system. Now with that, I think it should come to our understanding that in Tanzania, this the education system has been, put in subsectors, and one subsector is called ANFE, Adult and Informal Education, is a subsector. And in that aspect, that subsector describes two major roles that are being undertaken by the subsector. The first bigger role is, bringing availing opportunities for education to those who missed in the formal schooling. So now you talk of programs that are complementing formal education. Now with that, it is possible to find somebody of 16 years who has not been in the formal school. Now, 16 years, if you equate to primary education, this is over age. He is or she is no longer a child. So if you find that person in the basic education programs, the curriculum is different. It should be a paced curriculum and this and this. So we don't say like that the now education is not accepting others, it accept even youth. That is the implication. That's what it means, because they are coming, but they have a flexible curriculum that will help them, catch up with, the time that that was lost. You see, but there are programs that are stated. These programs are not meant and they are not meant for mainstreaming, but they are programs whose intention is to provide skills for livelihood, literacy skills, vocational skills, life skills, and so forth. And so it is quite significant to understand these two categories as it comes. Now, in the country, there is not, it is not so much troubling when it comes to the first cohort of programs, these that are complementing formal education, because the assessment frameworks are clear, the pathways are clear. The challenges we have now, in consideration by your second question, is on the programs that are availing opportunities for livelihood, for literacy, and what and what. Now, if you are going to your first question, Sonia, your second question, in this first question, I will categorize these stakeholders into two bigger groups. That is the intra-sectoral stakeholders and the intersectoral stakeholders. I could do that. That means it doesn't matter where they are set actors, non-set actors, whatever where they're coming, but there are those who are particularly setting themselves within the sector. And when it comes to education sector, some of these stakeholders, they understand that what we are doing is education and learning. Of course, the church has said, others are they don't really understand, we are trying to bring them on board. But when it comes now to intersectoral, and we have done research in Dodoma and Coast region in Tanzania, and we were looking at the agricultural extension officer working with adults in the farms, doing for the demonstration farms. These adults, they are illiterate, they don't know how to read and write. So he is pushing so hard to train them. And we were asking him, do you really understand what you are doing is an education? He will say, that education? No, I'm not teaching literacy. And we say, oh my goodness. Now you will see, because now you are transitioning from education sector to agriculture. Then you see now a challenge now when it comes to programs that are not, because agricultural extension, they are not doing program for complementing formal education. They're actually doing a flexible programs that are targeting immediate needs of the community at that moment. Now, with that, your second question comes in, you find there is no consensus when it comes to now shifting from a sector now to another sector. You see, so I wanted to say this because that is indeed a challenge here in Tanzania when it comes to now transiting from the intra-based intersectoral stakeholders and touching base to the intersectoral stakeholders, where health sector, agriculture sector, tourism, you see both from the macro, meso, into the micro level. And for those who want to know more, is that we the first question we covered it in the last presentations. You remember what we said in Tanzania? Yes, the stakeholders. They are everywhere. From the NEF, particularly in our country, it is well set. From the ministries, well set. At the meso level, well set, institutions well established, LGs well established. At the center level, well established as per laws. You see now, but now the implementation, I don't know what level comes in when it comes to implementation at the micro level. We don't see actively engage people who are actively engaging themselves in the programs, but the structures are set. Now the consensus could be what? I really don't know, maybe professionalization and so forth. But this is what I wanted to contribute, Sonia. So thank you.
No, thank you. I really like your differentiation between intrasectoral and intersectoral. And you also reminded me quite of a number of topics. Do you guys remember in, I think, one of your former assignments, we also asked about the scope of the system. And so maybe we as major responsible stakeholders like the Institute or ministries or even NGOs, we are clear on the scope. But exactly as Simpe gave a good example, other sectors that we need to deliver services that are needed, they may not realize they are part of that scope. That scope that has to bring agriculture, that has to bring health. So how do we bring them on board? And this is exactly this preparatory step. How do we go about from here? If you had to go back and do it, how would we do? Do we have first, for example, do you go to the Ministry of Agriculture? Do you have a few bilateral meetings? Do you look for entry points in their policies, in their strategies? By the way, often they have in their strategy entry points for literacy programs or other non-formal skills training programs. Can we hook ourselves onto that? So which champion and driver start this process? And I hope as we are discussing today, it's actually indirectly nice. We are a small group because we have time to talk. But I hope you can see how the pieces of former assignments and discussions are coming together. That we need the scope to be clear. We need to know which stakeholders work within that definition or scope of ALE, or as they call it in Tanzania, ANFE. And how do we bring them on board? Slowly by slowly. And sometimes it's through a case study. Sometimes you take a group of top officials or mixed stakeholders to the community level so that they can see it from the bottom up, and we start to integrate and bring people on board from there. You remember I said we need a catalyst or a crisis or just an entry point. Which entry point can spark this interest to get us together? Are there any other contributions or questions, or maybe you differ from me or the previous speakers? Please feel free. No other contributions or questions? It seems not. Then, guys, I'm going to wrap it up and to say thank you so much for joining. Even though it was a small session, we still spent more than an hour and it was really fruitful. I hope you start in this session at least to have an overview what will be involved when we continue with the consensus building sessions for the remaining time until December. Today is really the introductory session, and thinking about those preparatory activities. How would you go about to start a process of consensus building? So next week's session, we will look at the official startup, and this includes these activities that many of you alluded to, things such as how do we bring stakeholders together? How do we agree on a vision? Because often that's also lacking, the vision to know where you go, how would you build the system? Agreeing on the roles, responsibilities, doing a stakeholder analysis. That also means look at the structures, the mandates, etc. So next week's session is quite substantial, and it will focus on that part of consensus building. So I hope most of you can make it and that we can continue from there. And I will keep you guys posted on the webinar as well. I'm just trying to get more information about potential speakers. If there is still a major interest to do the first webinar on qualifications frameworks as a potential, not as a must system building block, but having potential discussions around that system building block. So I'll keep you posted and people can decide what would be their preferences, and we can push the webinar a little bit forward if November is very hectic for you guys. So I will send out WhatsApp to get a sense, because we really want you to benefit from it, but we also understand that everybody is so busy. And feel free really to call for any catch-ups or clarifications, even country team by country team. Just to let you know, many country teams have done this, and you are so welcome to reach out. Lindia is always kind to set us off and keep us going, so we can do country team specific sessions as well if you want to explore topics deeper. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Anything else from your side, Lindia? Maybe you want to mention the journal that's coming up to create some, I'm giving you a marketing, marketing platform. Lindy.
Yeah, about the, let me just admit Imelda.
Yeah.
Hi, Imelda. Yeah, so Moja is bringing out its first journal. It's a journal of adult education, and it is on, the theme is on inclusion. And it has articles from all over Africa, Tunisia from the north, Tanzania, and so on. So I will keep you posted about when the journal is launched. And I think most of you are on our newsletter list already. If not, then please go to the Moja platform and please subscribe to our newsletter. And because I'll be sending it out in the newsletter as well. And I will be sure to plug it on here again as soon as it is up. Thanks, Sonia.
Thanks so much, Lindia. Very interesting. So guys, thank you once again for joining. It was so nice because many of you we couldn't see last week, at least you joined this week. So it's nice you are back. And as I say, feel free to let us know if you can't make it and how we can accommodate you. Take care. Have a lovely afternoon. You have some bonus time at least today. So go and do all those urgent tasks. You always have to. Pleasure, guys. Take care. Hope to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.